Have you ever thought about this question? Is there really a difference between a gang leader wielding knives and belt buckles in 1920s Birmingham streets and a CEO wearing a suit on Wall Street today? The answer might shock you. Money doesn't speak. History does. And history whispers to us. The only difference between them is the type of violence they use. When you think of Peaky Blinders, what comes to mind? Razors sewn into caps, foggy Birmingham streets, a savage family building an empire through violence. But the real story is much bigger than that. The true story of the Peaky Blinders is about how street gangs evolved into corporate empires, how organized crime survived and grew by using the tools of business, the financial system, and power. And if you look carefully, you'll see that their journey mirrors the evolution of capitalism itself. Because what began with petty theft and extortion in back alleys ended as an early lesson about the financial systems that still shape the world today. The real Peaky Blinders weren't those stylish and powerful figures television made them out to be. In the late 19th century, Birmingham was a city exploding with industry but also drowning in poverty. Thousands of men returning from the military or too poor to find regular work in factories were drawn into gangs. The Peaky Blinders were just one of them. Most were young men barely out of their youth with nothing but belts, knives, and their fists as weapons. They weren't fighting for boardrooms, they were fighting for territory. Their first businesses were gambling dens, street theft, and extorting local shopkeepers for protection money. Economically, they were operating in the most basic version of a financial system, extracting wealth directly from those weaker than themselves. But here's where the system comes into play. Violence was an investment strategy, fear was a form of capital, and the incentive was simple: be strong or be crushed. As decades passed, the story changed. By the early 20th century, Britain was modernizing. Police forces became more organized, and random street violence no longer guaranteed survival. Gangs had to adapt, and this is where economic history gets interesting. Crime became business. The Peaky Blinders and groups like them began laundering money through bars, clubs, and betting operations. They bought influence from politicians, police, and businessmen. They started using contracts, shell companies, and even investments to mask their profits. What appeared to be chaos in the streets was actually an early stage of corporate strategy. Money doesn't speak, history does. And history tells us. When the system changes, players either change or disappear. The Peaky Blinders chose to change. This story wasn't unique to Birmingham. Across the Atlantic in America, organized crime followed the same trajectory. Italian and Irish gangs in New York and Chicago learned the same lesson the Peaky Blinders learned. Violence takes territory, but finance builds empires. During Prohibition in the 1920s, bootlegging gangs made billions. But the smart ones reinvested. They bought legitimate businesses, breweries, trucking companies, nightclubs, and created what economists would call vertical integration. From production to distribution, retail to consumer, they controlled the entire chain. This was a corporate model, just wearing a gangster face. Al Capone's genius wasn't just violence, it was organization. He kept books, paid salaries, invested in legitimate businesses. His accountants knew exactly how much money flowed through smuggling routes, how much went to bribes, how much could be laundered through restaurants and real estate. Capone's empire looked more like a corporation than a gang. He wasn't just a criminal. He was the CEO of an underground conglomerate. In Japan, the Yakuza followed a similar path. Starting as street gamblers and peddlers in the 17th century, They transformed into corporate-style syndicates by the 20th century. They wore suits, opened offices, printed business cards, invested in construction, finance, and entertainment. They even provided services that resembled government functions, settling disputes, enforcing contracts, providing credit. For many Japanese companies, doing business with a Yakuza member wasn't different from doing business with a bank. In Latin America, drug cartels perfected this model. They started as small smuggling groups and transformed into vertically integrated corporate empires: cocaine, marijuana, heroin. These weren't random contraband. They were products moved as efficiently as any multinational corporation. Cartel leaders employed lawyers, accountants, and PR specialists. And just like the Peaky Blinders, they blurred the line between gangster and businessman so thoroughly that the two became indistinguishable. Money doesn't speak, history does. And history says yesterday's gangster becomes today's tycoon. Yesterday's cartel boss becomes tomorrow's real estate mogul. Here's the lesson. Organized crime and corporate capitalism often operate on the same logic. Both rely on extracting wealth, consolidating control, securing influence over regulators and politicians. Both understand that financial systems can legitimize almost anything. What begins as a black market venture often graduates to legitimacy through reinvestment and time. The difference is only in who wrote the law. What was once smuggling can become trade. What was once extortion can become fees. What was once laundering can become investment. Now think about the financial system we live in. Giant corporations have more power than many governments. They influence laws, fund political campaigns, dictate the terms of global trade. Their empires aren't protected by razors sewn into caps, but by legal contracts and lobbying firms. But the dynamic is the same one that drove the Peaky Blinders. Power is about controlling flows, flow of money, flow of goods, flow of influence. And those who control these flows, whether in 1900s Birmingham or today's Wall Street, hold the real wealth. The Peaky Blinders understood this. Fear was a form of capital. If people feared you, they paid you. In modern finance, fear still operates as capital. Fear of missing out fuels speculative bubbles. Fear of default justifies higher interest rates. Fear of instability legitimizes government bailouts. The tactics are now more subtle, but the fundamental principle is the same. Fear is leverage. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The world never escaped Peaky Blinders' logic. It just dressed it up in better suits. Gangs that once fought with belts and knives built structures that taught us how money and power intertwine. They showed us that violence and finance aren't opposites. They're different stages of the same empire. First you seize territory, then you seize contracts, then you seize governments. That's the path from street gang to corporate empire. And it's the path that shaped much of our economic history. So what does this mean for you? This. When you look at the corporate empires dominating the global economy, you should ask harder questions about their origins and methods. Most of the world's largest companies have questionable beginnings. Money doesn't speak. History does. And history tells you. There's no clean money, no dirty money. All money passes through the same system. What matters is who controls it and whether you're positioned to protect yourself when that system moves against you. Real wealth isn't just money. It's control. Control of capital, control of influence, control of legitimacy. The Peaky Blinders learned this in miniature. Global corporations learned it on a massive scale. And as someone trying to protect your financial freedom, you need to learn it too. If you don't understand the system, history may not repeat, but it will still crush you. The next time you look admiringly at a skyscraper with a powerful company's logo, remember, most of these empires started in shadows no brighter than a Birmingham street. The real financial education here isn't about accounting tricks or investment strategies. It's about understanding how systems evolve, how power conceals its origins, and how economic history was written not just by respectable businessmen, but by street fighters who learned to think like CEOs. The Peaky Blinders weren't just a gang. They were a preview of the financial world we live in today. Old money,